Welcome to When We Die Talks. I'm your host, Zach Ancell. In this podcast, we explore different beliefs about what happens when we die and how those ideas shape the way we live. Thanks for tuning in. I'm glad you're here. This episode is brought to you by The Dead Book. Okay, let's get real for a second. How prepared are your parents, your siblings, your partner, or even you for the future? We're not talking about the fun stuff, but the hard stuff. End of life planning. It's a tough conversation, but that's why The Dead Book exists. The Dead Book makes it easy to plan ahead, even if you think you don't have the time, money, or assets. It's affordable, straightforward, and designed to give you and your loved ones peace of mind. They've made it their mission to help others avoid the chaos and stress that comes with being unprepared. Visit thedeadbook.co and get started today. And just for listening, use the code WWDT at checkout for 15% off. Hey everyone, this is the last episode of the year, so I thought I'd take a little more time for the intro. It's been a spectacularly shitty year, and I don't really know any other way to say it. At some point, I'll share more of the specifics, but right now it's not important. Looking back though, it makes me think of death and grief in ways that we don't really normally talk about. I had someone tell me once that there are lowercase d deaths and then the big death that we always think of. Throughout our lives, we go through so many little deaths. Moving away from friends, switching careers or getting fired, a breakup. A part of ourselves dies in those situations, the person we would have become if those things hadn't happened. That might be easy to move on from if it's something you choose, like switching careers, but it can be really hard in the instance of huge life change. We grieve in those moments too. We grieve for the loss of life we thought we would have and the people we thought we'd become. Lives we'd imagined we'd live with people we'd imagined doing it with. All of that to say, just a huge thank you to all of you who have supported me in this project and during one of the hardest times of my life. In such a challenging year, this was often the only thing that gave me purpose. It helped me get out of bed some days when I didn't want to. It pushed me to interact with people when I didn't want to. It helped me grow even when I didn't want to. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. I needed this more than I can explain. And with all that said, let's get to today's episode. I'm joined by Barbara Solomon, who brings a perspective shaped by years as a nurse, witnessing life and death in ways few of us ever will. Barbara's journey led her to become a death doula and a facilitator at Death Cafés, spaces where people come together to talk openly about something society so often avoids, death. We explore Barbara's reflections on what she learned from being at the bedside of those at the end of their lives, her thoughts on what happens when we die, and the importance of living fully. Whether you're facing lowercase d deaths or grappling with the big one, I think you'll find it just as meaningful. I hope you enjoy. It's good to see you again, and I appreciate you taking the time to be on the show. When I was first putting together this kind of initial set of interviews, I was trying to find a wide range of people, people who have had loss, people who have terminal diagnoses. And one thing that came up was I really want to find a medical professional. And it just wasn't happening. And then, we, met and I was like, perfect. But before we get into that, I feel like it'd be super beneficial to talk about how we met, because I think it's something that would be really great for this podcast community to know about. And so we met at a Death Café. It's something that my friend Wendy told me about many years ago, but only went, for the first time a month ago. And that's where we met. And so you've been involved with it a little bit. And so I thought it might be good to start there and have you kind of share a little bit about what a Death Café is and, how you got involved a little bit.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. And I'm glad to be here. So for some reason, it's a topic I love talking about. This. Some people think it's morbid. I actually find it fascinating.
Well, you're in the right place.
Yes, good. And like you, I heard about Death Café many, many years ago. I just never had the opportunity to attend one. And then several months ago, I decided to become certified as an end-of-life doula, or also known as death doula. And during the certification process, in the coursework, they talked about Death Cafés. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I got to go check that out. So I found City of Roses, Death Café, and they are actually international. So they're all over the place, and people can find them pretty much anywhere. And they meet, at least the one here meets monthly. And we come and talk about death with no other agenda. There's no guiding meditation. There's no questions except for, why are you here? What do you want to talk about with your experience of death? And in our groups, we have tables of, maybe 5 or 6 people, and everybody just goes around and shares what death means to them and listens to other people's ideas. And it's fascinating. And it does give people an opportunity to share something that it may be close to their heart, where they don't have a lot of other venues or outlets for, because it is still such a taboo subject in our society.
Yeah, for sure. I think the thing that I really enjoyed was like we had some really great conversations.
Yeah.
And I imagine, I don't think I'm scheduled this month, but next month it's going to be completely different. It's going to be a completely different experience because people are coming in with their own different stories and ideas. And like you said, there's no agenda, which is really, really nice. And so I'm sure you've had, a lot of great conversations and heard a lot of very interesting things through that process.
I have. Now, I have only been to maybe 5 or 6 death cafes. And this last one, I became a facilitator.
Yeah, you were my facilitator.
Right. That's how we met. Yeah, it was fun. But yeah, everyone's been different in the group. Even though some of the people come over and over, they have different things to share. There's always such a wide variety of people who come and bring their experiences that it's so fascinating and educational and healing in some ways.
Yeah, and life is always happening, right? So that means death is also always happening.
Exactly.
So people are definitely bringing recent experiences and older experiences. And but I just thought it would be a really good way to kind of start this because that's how we met. And I do think it's something that, the people listening to this podcast, should look for.
Yes. They have a nice website. And so if people go and just type in Death Café, there's the ability to find one that's close to wherever you live. So, I encourage people to go check it out.
Perfect. Well, so that's how we met. But, I wanted to get into your story and your background. And so you were a nurse for many years. So can you tell me kind of about that experience? And I think you probably saw a lot of death being involved in that.
I did, actually. And it really helped me to remember to live life to the fullest every day. I would see things where people would, die suddenly or get these diagnoses. And it helped me remind me that there's like no guarantees about life. And so while we're here, we should just embrace it to the best of our ability. And so I found that really helpful. And I experienced so many different examples, I guess, of people dying and how family members reacted. Oftentimes it was very painful for them. I mean, I felt my grandpa died when he was 90. And these days people live to be 90 and it's pretty common. But back then, this was in the late 80s, 1980s, and he was pretty old. People didn't live that long back then. And he developed an aneurysm and was in the hospital. And they said, well, we can do surgery, but it's really a very invasive procedure and there's a hard recovery. And my family, they decided, let's just sit with him and let him go. And this happened back east. I was still out here in Portland, so I wasn't there, but I was in contact with him. And I was so proud of my family to just be able to make that decision and sit with him and just be with him while he transitioned. And it was just such a nice way to let him take the next step without too much drama and trauma.
Yeah.
And I unfortunately experienced a lot of that as a nurse, and it really kind of broke my heart. You'd see these family members and they're like, you have to save him. And it's like, well, his organ systems are not compatible with life. I mean, there's just so much we can do. And it was just, I just felt like there was a lot of healing still that had to be done within that family, and they hadn't had the opportunity. So they just grasped on to keep him here, without maybe even realizing. But it's just really sad.
I can imagine. I think the thing that's interesting is like you talk about how it helped you kind of see life, as this kind of beautiful thing. But was that also a challenge of like going to work every day and knowing kind of the hard things that you might see, or the families going through these hardships?
It's funny. Normally it didn't bother me that much, although I do admit that when I had three days in a row when I had patients who coded, that's when I'm like, I need to find another job. And I was working in ICU, and a lot of it was really what we did as far as having to save everybody. I worked at the VA, and so you get a lot of residents and interns and these young doctors who have to save everybody.
Yeah.
And this was quite a long time ago, before even hospice was common. And so it's like, we have to save everybody, because if they die, that's a failure for us, And so I did things actually that I felt were kind of like abuse of a corpse, just to keep somebody alive. And it was just, that part was really uncomfortable for me, versus let's just be with them and help them make a peaceful transition. So like I say, after my third code, it's like, okay, it's time for me to get out of this. And then I started working in research, and it was totally different and much more interesting. But yeah, it was hard, not because the people were dying, but because of the way they were having to go.
Yeah, I can imagine like the balancing act of like saving lives, but also like to some extent people are statistics, right? And it's like, if our numbers get low, that doesn't look good on the hospital or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
And that's a real challenge.
Oh, yeah, it really is. And it's a shame. And I'm so glad now, since then, people embrace hospice, the concept of hospice much more, and palliative care philosophies much more. So it is more like, let's help them be comfortable. But, this was in the 80s, and it just wasn't part of the cultural mentality at that time. So it was just kind of starting to come into play.
So how long were you working kind of in the ER or intensive care? Sorry.
Yeah, ICU. I only did that for a couple of years because of the way that we flogged the dead, basically. But I worked in a number of other areas. I worked in long-term care, and I actually saw people there die, sometimes from things like infected bed sores that then they'd get septic. And so there's sometimes just I did med surge, just the regular hospital units, and sometimes patients would die there. And so it's just such a part of life. And I mean, I was fortunate because I was with both of my parents when they made their transition. And again, I'm glad that I had the opportunity to be with them and experience that with them and help them kind of go off. And,
the big question, of this project is what happens when we die. And, I want to get to that, but I'm also very curious about, before you go into the medical industry versus when you left. I guess you probably didn't, you're a death doula now. And so that's still kind of part of it. But, when you leave ICU or, kind of all that stuff, did your perspective on what happens after change throughout that?
I think just as I've grown and lived, I think my perspective has changed a little bit. I mean, when I was young, I didn't really know, I guess some people do, but I didn't. But I did have some unusual experiences when I was a kid. I was in a car one time, and we were driving along the street, and there's an older woman up on the stoop sweeping, and suddenly I was in her head. And we were all excited because the grandkids were coming over for a visit that afternoon, and we were kind of, this is the final part of cleaning the house, getting ready for their visit. And then, boom, I was back in my own body. But it was just so interesting to me. It's like, oh, that's, So it kind of gave me a sense that there's more than just this physical body that we have. But I didn't really understand what to do with it. But I just had a few of those types of experiences. And so I And then, of course, I kind of came of age in the late 60s. So I did like a lot of acid and psilocybin and things like that. So,
awesome.
Yeah. So, I had a lot of, really mind expanding experiences and, got into some meditation and things like that. So I guess I've always had the sense of that there's more than just what we see. I mean, I read a lot of Carlos Castaneda books and Seth books and, those kinds of things that talk about altered and expanded consciousnesses and things like that. So it made sense to me. And then since then, I've had experiences where I've kind of communicated with people who have transitioned. So it's not something that comes naturally. In fact, sometimes it's just spontaneous, although I have another friend who's very psychic. And so when she and I get together, it's very easy to kind of connect. But so to me, it's just really kind of a part of life. It's nothing that's separate or different. It's just kind of, just like drinking water. But, it happens.
So yeah, maybe that is a good point to, what do you think happens when we die?
Well, excuse me. I mean, it's all speculation, and I've read a number of books by people and talked with people who have and heard people who have had near-death experiences, and so everything that I've taken in from their examples, and then just my own communication with people who I've known who have transitioned, I think that we really just kind of expand our consciousness. I mean, to me, our bodies are constraints. It's almost like a filter or a governor, that kind of keeps, like if you get a governor on your car, it can't go over 60 miles per hour or whatever it's set at. So it's almost like our bodies and our brains are kind of like that, and it kind of keeps us small. But there's so much more, and when we do certain practices, we can kind of get to some of that, get glimpses of the infinite. But I think that once we step out of these bodies, that's where we are. It's kind of in that infinite soup or whatever you want to call it.
I love that term, infinite soup.
And then, I mean, there's different perspectives of what we do there. We go and talk to our guides. We decide, where we're going to go next. And I mean, I don't know. I can't really say it's going to be this or that. But that's kind of like what I think is going to happen. So,
yeah. And so with that being true, what does that mean for life? With this governor that we have, is there lessons that we're learning here, or is it just play, or doesn't necessarily feel like play all the time? It feels like a lot of suffering, but
it does. Yeah. But I think that we need to have a little contrast so that when we do play, we have something to compare it to.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you've ever heard of Abraham Hicks. Are you familiar with Abraham Hicks?
No.
Well, Abraham is an entity that's channeled through this woman named Esther Hicks. And they're a fascinating duo. And so according to them and some other things that I've read, it's like we're here really to experience joy. But we can't only experience joy because then we wouldn't have anything to contrast it to. So that's
balance.
Right. Some other people feel like we're here to learn lessons, and I mean, that's part of it, I guess, it's like.
Maybe fun is the lesson.
Yeah. And the more we roll with those things that trip us up, then the sooner we can get back to experience the joy, But we do have to have some of those hiccups because, like I said, otherwise we wouldn't know. If everything is like this, then there's no comparison. So, I think that's kind of part of that yin yang concept. We have to have that opposite to, and I find that being aware, meditating, practicing energy healing, and just doing different things that bring me to my center and help me be aware that I am part of this whole universe. And my body maybe stops right here, but my energy in me continues on. It helps me to be able to roll with those things easier and get up and get back to the joy a little bit faster.
Yeah, we have to get back to the joy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like with this project, it is about my exploration of death and becoming more comfortable with it. And, when I hear you talk about it, it's like, there doesn't seem to be any fear around death. It seems like, I'm not saying that you're welcoming it tomorrow, but it doesn't seem like it's something that you fear.
No, I really don't. And I've been around actually a couple friends who I was with when they were transitioning. And the one of them, his last breath, and he went like this, reached up and so it's like,
and that's a common thing.
Yes, very common. And other people, they talk about so and so's here, and I was doing years ago, and I was still doing some Reiki. I had somebody who came to me. I was going to acupuncture school at the time, but somebody came to me for Reiki for a cancer situation. And to look at this person, you wouldn't think that they had cancer. They looked very healthy. They acted very healthy. And they were laying on my table, and I was doing a session, and I felt all these, to me, they felt like angels just in the room. And so I thought, oh, maybe they're here to heal him, And I didn't say anything. I was going to, oh, you're going to be healed. The angels are here. But I said, I won't say anything. And the next week, he was coming once a week. The next week, he couldn't make it because something came up. And then suddenly he had a downturn and kind of things went. So then I went out to his house to do another session. And I was thinking, that's a good thing I didn't say anything about those angels healing him. But I started thinking, well, maybe they're here just to kind of, prepare or something, because they definitely felt like they were there for him. And, of course, I have no physical evidence of that.
Yeah.
But there's this a knowing within me that, that's what it was. So.
And I think that's ultimately, again, back to the project a little bit, is like, I think we all kind of have to come to terms with, I guess we don't have to, but I think we all kind of have to find something that we believe in, because it's going to happen. And so that's having some peace around it or acceptance around it, I think probably makes that transition easier.
Yes.
And that's why I want to talk about it. Because I am trying to figure out, I'm trying to make peace with myself, and hearing from people like you you seem so comfortable with the concept of death, and you've experienced a lot more than I have. But yeah, it's refreshing versus I feel like, in general, when you talk about death, a lot of people just want to shy away from it. A lot of people are afraid of it. And I was tired of being afraid of it. So yeah, it's very interesting to see someone who it's like you're embracing it.
And actually, I was just thinking of that same word, embracing, because I embrace your attitude around it. I think what you're doing is wonderful. And it's one reason why I decided to become an end-of-life doula or a death doula, because there's so many people, everyone's going to die, but so many people are afraid to talk about it, and there's no reason to. So, there's no reason to be afraid of it. We can be comfortable around it. And research shows that, most people want to die at home, but very few people actually do. And those people who have explored it have an easier transition. So, we don't know. I could walk out your door and be hit by a car, and
I almost say that every interview where I'm like,
right, yeah.
It could happen.
That's right,
even with the people that I've talked to that have terminal diagnoses, like, I could die before you. We don't know that.
Right.
We don't know.
We don't know.
So yeah, it's interesting. But kind of jumping on to the death doula, like, are you practicing? Like, what does that look like so far? And how does that compare to your time as a nurse versus as a death doula?
Well, that's actually a great question, but I'm just getting started. I'm just starting my business. And so I've done a couple practice sessions with some friends, and they've all seemed to think it is very helpful for them. So I've also in the past done a life coaching course. So that helps a lot with the death doula, because really what makes it different, this is really, it's all non-medical, but it's really more walking with people, asking them questions, listening to them, giving feedback as to, what I'm hearing them say, try to help them clarify things. And so the few sessions that I've done, they've found very helpful. And so I'm excited about it. I'm really excited about it. So.
Yeah, it feels like death doula is like becoming a much more common term.
Yeah.
And people are seemingly more receptive of it. And it's so strange. I think Anna, who, was also at the Death Café and was on the podcast before, I think she even said something along the lines of, we have doulas at the beginning of our lives, so why would that be any different at the end of our lives?
Totally.
And I just love that idea of, caring people like yourself, helping people kind of walk through this thing that we don't talk about. And, even in death, like a lot of the process for a lot of people is also hidden. It's like, the coffin and all that stuff. There's so much that even once it happens, it's still really closed off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I love the idea of someone like you helping people kind of accept it a little bit more. Kind of like you were saying with your family, with your grandfather, and kind of accepting, hey, like this is not the right choice for him, versus families who are fighting and saying, hey, you need to do this, you need to do this. And you're like, yeah, that's not going to help. It's that healing that's happening before.
Right.
That I feel like so many people need to do. And yeah, we're not talking about it. So how can you heal from something you don't talk about?
Actually, that's a perfect example. And I'm not a therapist, and I'm not here to help people heal, but I am here to help them realize that life is it's so full of opportunities, and healing whatever you need to heal is really a beautiful opportunity.
I don't think death doula was something I had known about until I started kind of working on this project, and Anna, and then meeting you, and then, through my reading and stuff like that. It's something that is very, very interesting.
And I enjoyed listening to her during our Death Café discussion, because she's certainly got more experience, and I love just how she expresses herself around it. And I enjoyed listening to her with your podcast too. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And so, kind of the question where I kind of pose, I could get hit by a car. If you were to die tomorrow, what would you want your loved ones to know? What would you want your friends to know about you?
I think they know what they need to know.
That's good.
Yeah. I just recently heard of something called an ethical will. And it's kind of a peculiar term to me. But what it is when you leave a message to your loved ones and give them a philosophy of your life, and this is kind of what life means to me, and this is what I tried to impart and share with you as you were growing up, if it's for your kids, and things like that. And so I was talking to my son about that the other day. But basically, whenever I see my son or my daughter-in-law or even my husband, whenever we leave, it's always like, I love you, and kiss, and things like that. So I think that they know that, I mean, they know, how I feel. And if something was to happen, they know as far as like, what my wishes are, as far as like extending life and tube feeding me or, anything like that. So
I am going to challenge you a little bit.
Okay.
Because I love the term life philosophy. Mm-hmm. What would your life philosophy be?
Well, I'm a double Sagittarius, so we're very enthusiastic and open. And I think my life philosophy is really live life to the fullest. Take as many experiences as you can, and be honest, be open. I feel like I'm loyal, and I want to do good. I mean, I feel like that's just I won't say driving me, but maybe helping me along. So,
the guiding path.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, just enjoy as much as I can.
Yeah.
And it's funny because when my son went off to college and then he came home after a while and we were kind of talking and then he was going off to see some friends and I'm like, oh, have fun. And he's like, you always tell me, say have fun, no matter what I'm doing, say have fun. And it's like, yeah, I guess that's my philosophy, have fun.
The world would probably be a lot better place if people had more fun.
Yeah.
And stress less. I feel like that's something I'm also trying to do kind of with this project is like find ways to like challenge myself and not like, oh, I, need to hit this goal or I need to achieve this. But like, one of my biggest fears is drowning. I've never been a fan of water. I had a couple incidents as a kid, and that definitely impacted me. And I've started to look at like, maybe I should take a freediving class and like just kind of face that fear a little bit. And like, maybe that's a weird sense of fun, but like exploring stuff like that and challenging and putting yourself in situations. Cause I think so much of our lives is on autopilot. And so telling people to have fun, I think that's a great thing.
Yeah. And I think I love your idea of going out and facing your fear. I think that's wonderful. So.
We'll see if I do it. It's still up in the air.
That's okay. Even just the fact that you're thinking about it, and considering it, I think is wonderful. So, and that's opening, you know. So, I mean, part of my belief is that we are eternal beings. And so my understanding, and this is something that's really hitting home now with the whole social situation, but it helps because it's like, this is an experience. What we're having right now is just an experience. It's not our true nature. It's not, and it's not like, oh, well, I can screw up now because I have another life, so I can just make it up then.
Yeah.
And some people, maybe believe that. And if that's what they want to do, that's fine. But for me, it's like, I just don't have to take anything that seriously. And I do a lot of volunteer work, and I work as a court-appointed advocate for kids in foster care, so it's not like I don't care.
Yeah.
But even in those situations where it could get extremely frustrating, I have the ability to kind of step back and just say, okay, this is what it is, and I'm going to do my best, and then the rest I just have to let go of, and there's a bigger something in play, and so, I shine my light, and then that's all I can do.
Yeah.
So
there's this huge global bubble, right? But it's like the amount that I can impact is much, much, much smaller. And so worrying about these huge things sometimes is just not beneficial. And I can impact these kids that I'm working with, or, I think that's beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm curious, I guess. So, and that's part of also, I guess, my driving force is what motivates me. So I ask a lot of questions, and I like to learn new things and look at things from different perspectives. And so
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming onto the show. I feel like we should plug your business so people can reach out and find you.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it's Final Chapter Chats, and it's at finalchapterchats.com.
Perfect.
And
I'll put it in the show notes so people can find you if they're looking for a death doula. And with a death doula, is there a region? Like, is it Oregon specific, and I'm sure you're probably only working locally, but I don't know how that works.
Well, it's interesting. Yeah, I initially planned on just working in East County because I live out in East County. But the two people who I've done tests with actually live back east. So we've done things on the phone. We can do things via Zoom. So, there's really no reason not to just meet anybody.
The future is now.
Right.
Well, that's awesome. And I'll add that into the show notes so people can find you. And just thank you so much for coming on. And I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of When We Die Talks. I hope today's conversation sparked some thoughts and helped you feel a little more at ease with the idea of death. Remember, this journey is all about exploring our beliefs and fears together, so I'd love to hear from you. Call our voicemail at 971-328-0864 and share what you think happens when we die. Your thoughts might just be featured on a future episode and could help others on their own journey. Until next time, have a good life.